All right. Well, welcome to the start of our abnormal psychology unit. This is usually one that people like quite a bit. Abnormal psychology is a lot of times what people think of when they think of the field. These are disorders that different people have. These would be reasons that people would seek treatment to help with their mental health, things of that nature. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to look at first what actually classifies as abnormal behavior. What does it take to go from something that might be what we would consider to be quirky or just a little bit of an odd behavior to the behavior being diagnosable as abnormal? So that's what we're going to take a look at here as we do our introduction. There are 4 Ds that psychologists look at when they are looking at abnormal behavior. And I've got those 4 listed for you here on the screen. They're deviance, distress, dysfunction, and danger. And we'll go through each one of those in a little bit of detail. Basically, you probably need a couple of these for a behavior to be considered an abnormal behavior, be diagnosed by some sort of mental health professional. But let's take a look at each one of these and see what's going on. The first one is deviance, and deviance is just simply the idea that the behavior is going against the norms of society. So there are lots of norms in societies that we live by every day. Probably don't think a whole lot about it. The amount of clothes that people wear can vary from society to society, for instance. And what you might wear in one society would look really different or be very deviant in another. If you think about some very fundamentally Muslim countries, women will a lot of times wear the burqas, where you won't be able to see anything but their eyes, in some cases, not even the eyes. If that were to happen here in the United States, we would look at that as being a bit abnormal. But for somebody with those religious beliefs, that's not abnormal. So you kind of got to see how those things are going to mesh up when you're looking at somebody that was there. Now, if you had somebody that was simply just refusing to wear clothes out into public to the point where they had been arrested for lewdness or things like that, obviously that's a little more of an abnormal behavior. But it's basically anything that goes against what the culture decides. Now, I'm going to link for you. One of the best ways to see this, or one of the most interesting, is to see food and what people eat in different forms of food. One of my favorite movies when I was a kid was the movie Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And so I'm going to link on our YouTube page a scene from Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom. It was one of my favorites. They sit down for a meal in India. And as they sit down for the meal in India, everybody's pretty excited about the food being put on the table, except for the Americans that are there, and some stuff maybe they wouldn't be used to eating. And so I'll link that for you there on the YouTube page. But anyway, deviance is just this idea that you are going against what is normal expected behavior. And it could be, like I said, anything from dress to social distance, not like social distancing in the pandemic sense, but just usually in the United States, we leave a little bit of space between each other when we talk, just as kind of a comforting buffer. Different cultures might have different ideas of that. Second D is distress. And if a patient comes in and they are in emotional or physical distress, that can be that can be a sign that there's an abnormal behavior that's going on. So physical distress might be something like a cutting type of behavior would definitely be a sign of physical distress. Emotional distress, anxiety, depression, those sorts of things that might be having an effect on somebody. Now, the interesting thing is, you can have abnormal behavior. And this is a good example of not having to have all four of these really to fit in. You can have a mental disorder and be happy as a clam. There can be no distress. Now, the distress may actually be in the people that know and love you, that they don't like those behaviors a whole lot. But take, for instance, somebody with schizophrenia that's hearing or seeing things that aren't there. That is perfectly normal to them. But when a family member, for instance, would hear them talking to somebody that wasn't there, that would most definitely be distressing to that family member. So, deviance, distress. The next one is dysfunction. This is kind of the easiest way to tell if something is, if a behavior is abnormal, if it keeps you from living the life you would want to live. So if it interferes with your daily functioning, then a behavior is considered to be abnormal. And so if you are suffering from something like agoraphobia, which is a fear of unfamiliar places, and it keeps you from leaving your house, that is defined as an abnormal behavior. Right, that's keeping you from experiencing the things you want to experience, doing the things that you want to do, and so that would be something that was considered abnormal. For instance, you could have somebody who's anorexic, and that person who's anorexic is not eating. That is considered to be an abnormal behavior. Now, you see on the screen, I asked a question: was Gandhi dysfunctional? This is again one of those judgment calls, because a guy like Gandhi, as he's trying to draw attention to uh, the dangers of colonialism in his country, would go on these hunger strikes to kind of draw world attention. Obviously, that's not an abnormal behavior psychologically. He's doing that to focus attention there. But again, somebody who was anorexic and not eating would be an abnormal behavior. And it really takes us to our last one here, and it's the idea of danger. If you're a threat to yourself, or if you're a threat to other people, that can be considered an abnormal behavior. This is the only one of these four Ds that can get you involuntarily committed into a mental health facility. If you're found to be a danger to yourself or to others, we're going to take a look in one of the actively learns that we do of a couple of instances of poor judgment calls when it comes to deciding whether or not a patient is dangerous to themselves or to others. And because people kind of said, "No, we think they're basically harmless," there were a couple of instances of violence where maybe some institutionalization would have been beneficial for the person, and obviously ultimately the victims. But if you're a threat to yourself, so if you're a suicide risk, something like that, or if the mental disorder you have is causing you to perhaps be violent to others, that's that fourth D. So we've got deviance, we've got distress, dysfunction, and danger. One of the places that a lot of these symptoms are collected is in this book. It's called the DSM. It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is quite a mouthful. As you can see from the picture, it's on its fifth edition. First one came out in 1952. And basically the desire was to say, okay, we need some kind of common criteria. If we're going to diagnose a patient with depression, what does that look like? And we want that to look the same in Indiana as it does in New York, as it does in Idaho, wherever you're at. So let's get this even across countries. Let's set down this list of criteria for this, and that's kind of where the DSM comes from. It lists the symptoms for particular disorders. You can find this online. I've got it linked on the Canvas page for you. It's kind of fun if you like just kind of looking at this stuff to peek in and see what constitutes some of these different disorders. It also has common treatments for the disorders that are in there. This can get a little controversial because a lot of times insurance companies will use this book to determine what they will and won't pay for, and so that can be be a little different if there are new and different treatments. They update this every so often. Like I said, there have been 5 different just simple numbers. The 4th edition was revised before the 5th one came out. And so they do a pretty good job of keeping up to date. In this last one, just to kind of show you, they added gambling addiction. They also changed some stuff about binge eating disorder. And so there are different things every time, and a group of psychologists gets together, kind of trying to figure out what's happening there. So that's the DSM and how it'll go through. So as we start to go through these categories, a lot of the stuff that we'll be talking about as far as symptoms and treatments comes from the DSM. But this is the definition we're going to use of abnormal behavior. Is it deviant? Does it cause distress? Is it dysfunctional? And is it a dangerous situation for the patient to be in?